Good morning and welcome back. That was a quick break. I hope you had a chance to grab another coffee or take a break or a quick walk or a stretch. So thanks for joining us again. This session is going to be another fantastic one, jam-packed with information. And to start the session off, I'd like to introduce Justin McKinnon. He happens to be the first vice of the Fort St. John and District Chamber of Commerce and is also with Petron Communications. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for all the hard work you've done on this conference. It's been pretty interesting so far. And for those of you that don't know me, I manage a company called Petron Communications, and this session is going to be quite interesting because we're kind of on the front end of some of the innovation changes that are happening. When you're going to put in a new facility or new wells, usually people want to find a way to communicate. So our phone rings pretty fast when stuff like that happens. And, you know, it's interesting as time goes on, you know, you think, how are we ever going to get to net zero? And I remember when I first started here 15 years ago, people were still trying to figure out how to send a fax from the field. And now we have, you know, virtual reality Wi-Fi within gas plants. It's intrinsically safe. And they have an operator with a guy in Houston on the other end, and they're working on a project together. So, you know, in 15 short years since I started here, we have these leaps and bounds in communication. That's only going to be more. So this is going to be a pretty interesting session. And with that being said, I want to introduce Bryan Cox from the Canadian LNG Alliance. He doesn't really need much introduction. He's already spoken quite a bit at this conference, but Bryan, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin, for the introduction. It is great to be here again today with you. What a great conference this has been so far. So again, my thanks to Cheryl and the Fort St. John Chamber of Commerce team for this really first-rate event that's been ongoing over the last 2 days. I'm really pleased to be with you again. Again, I'm Bryan Cox. I'm President and CEO of the Canadian LNG Alliance. I am joining you today from the traditional territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo people. And really excited to be here with this panel because I think it's a great addition to the dialogue of what we've been having over the last few days. So what I want to do is introduce our panel, do a bit of an introduction, and then get into the dialogue. And to all of you that are attending and have attended all of the panels over the last few days, we all know how hard this is to continue to engage online like this. We know we're getting closer to the home stretch where we're going to be face to face. It really helps us for you to engage with us. You know, usually when you're on a stage and you're able to see your faces and see how our conversation and dialogue is landing, you know, it's so helpful. And without being able to do that, really getting your questions into the Q&A is so helpful for us and the panelists. So please do use that Q&A function on the screen so that we can engage with you and really help to build that dialogue as we move forward. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today as we talk about innovation and technology in our sector, net zero, all of these big topics that we talk about. And so let me quickly introduce our panelists, which I'm really excited about. So our first panelist I'll introduce is Scott Volk, who's the Innovation and Technology Lead for Tourmaline. And so you've heard a lot about Tourmaline. Leah Turner, who introduced me in my keynote yesterday, you guys saw that video of what Tourmaline is doing, the innovations, the great processes, just a great company. They're making an excellent, you know, really interesting acquisitions, a really forward front foot company. So great to have Scott here to be able to talk to us about what they're doing. And Scott's also a member of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund Innovation Committee, so brings even another layer to this conversation, an industry veteran, and looking forward to hearing from Scott today. So Scott, welcome. I see you're on screen. Our next panelist is Andrew Brown, who's the head of engineering with Woodfibre LNG. And Woodfibre, as we know, is a project that's you know, hopefully getting closer to final investment decision. It's been progressing and working through doing that hard work that I talked about in my keynote over those past several years to get ready. And Andrew is the head of engineering for Woodfibre, and you know, an industry veteran from globally, so has a really global perspective that he can bring to this dialogue today about the industry and about our energy transformation that we're in. And our final panelist is really exciting, Bill Tam. It's great to have you here today, Bill. Bill's the Chief Operating Officer of the Digital Supercluster. You know, an entrepreneur, just a tech sector giant in British Columbia who's really all about partnerships. And I've known Bill for a long time across several of my roles, including the mining industry. And that's why I think this is such a powerful panel, because you know what, our energy dialogue, our economy dialogue has been way too siloed in British Columbia and Canada over the past forever, really. And I think that conversations like this help de-silo it, because it's not about, there is no such thing as a natural resources economy or such a thing as a tech economy. There's just one economy, and we're completely interconnected, and particularly in Canada, where we have our natural resource industries. You think of forestry, mining, natural gas, all of it, and it's all connected into the technology and innovation that we're continuously in. We talk a lot about being in the midst of an energy transformation, and we are. But guess what? We've always been in an energy transformation since the beginning of time. We are constantly evolving our energy systems, and it's complex. And most people don't think about energy until they flip their light switch on and the lights don't go on. These folks on this panel think about it all day long in the global way that it needs to be thought about. And when you think about our lowest emission LNG that we are producing and can produce from Canada, providing solutions to parts of the world that are looking for it. You heard me talk about that yesterday. Countries with net zero commitments that are choosing LNG as one of their solutions. We need these multiple pathways. And so it's important about unpacking this complex energy system that we have, and how we're going to achieve the goals, the shared goals that we all want to achieve together. So enough from me. Let's hear from our panelists, who are all experts in their field. So I want to give them a few minutes to say a few words, and then let's get into a Q&A. And again, please put your questions as you hear the presentations into the Q&A, and I'll be sure to get to those. So I want to start with Scott. So Scott, over to you, and looking forward to hearing your remarks.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, my name is Scott Volk. I'm the Technology and Innovation Lead here at Tourmaline. I run a dedicated team of people that are working on innovation in our company, which is definitely a sustainable piece of work these days. Pretty much all of our innovation has a sustainability spin. For people that don't know Tourmaline, Tourmaline is now Canada's largest natural gas producer. We kind of have focus areas in three different groups. We've got Deep Basin, where we have mostly a natural gas play. In Alberta, we've got a play in Peace River Arch, which is more of a light oil play. And then we also have a very significant presence in BC Montney, which is kind of growing every day, it feels like. So yeah, and as kind of a direction, we're planning on growing more into Montney, BC, and that's kind of the company. For those that haven't really heard that much about our reputation, we like to consider ourselves an efficient, low-cost producer. And it used to be thought of that would mean kind of a conflict against a sustainability piece. And I propose we kind of found out that we've always been sustainable, but we were kind of there by accident. So when you're a natural gas producer and you're looking to be a low-cost producer and really efficient at what you do, it's about keeping your resource in the pipeline and not letting it escape as an emissions. And it's about doing things in an efficient manner where you can really reduce the amount of energy you're putting in, the amount of energy and dollars you're putting in order to get gas out of the ground. So we kind of found that we built this culture of sustainability and innovation, somewhat just built around the fact that we wanted to be good at what we did in the first place. And I would consider that those two things aren't conflicting whatsoever, that sustainability, innovation, and efficiency are 100% all the same piece. So from my role as the technology and innovation lead, having a company that stands behind you and stands behind innovation and efficiency makes my role so much easier, where a lot of our innovation is driven by grassroots projects that are coming from the field or coming from different field offices or coming from just all the different functional groups within Tourmaline. So it's a great place and a great vantage point to be when you've got a culture kind of in that space. So to kind of get into the direct topic of innovation and the way to net zero, I kind of want to put something out there where I feel like people talk about these big long-term goals. It's all about 2050 and it's all about being zero, and they kind of think about it as well, you have to have a zero emission technology or it's not even worth starting. And I propose that this problem is better attacked the same way we've attacked all the very difficult problems through history, and that it's at one piece at a time. So the continuous improvement model, the finding the opportunities to improve your performance, improve your emissions, one step at a time gets you to a great big difference when you kind of look back. So that same model that Tourmaline's used in order to become an efficient, low-cost operator, in my mind, scales perfectly into sustainability and innovation as a way to provide sustainability. So to kind of build out on some of those pieces, we're looking at technologies today, whether it be, it's not all, like, definitely we're looking at the big projects, the hydrogens, the CNGs vehicles, the renewable natural gas, all the big kind of carbon capture, all the big buzzwords that have big impacts, that we're definitely looking at those. But I would say where we're making the biggest amount of improvements are on the bunch of little things. So efficiency in operations. So if you can find ways to do like waste heat recovery, you can make a very meaningful impact on your emissions performance and actually save a lot of money. We're big into diesel displacement. So I propose that we're probably leading that front, in that diesel displacement's a huge piece of our business. So we've got technology on drilling rigs and completions, and we're using our own natural gas and displacing diesel fuel, and that way we're burning a lower carbon fuel. We're taking trucks off the road and those pieces of business. And I think what will kind of lead into Bill's talk later is what we're finding more and more is that the data and the proof is more and more important than it has been in the past. So now when we do project waste heat recovery, for example, there's the opportunity to get voluntary carbon offsets from it. So getting solid data that you can validate and stand behind is now critically important to the sustainability and the future of sustainability. So from my point of view, I think it's all the little pieces, and I could kind of go on and on. Like this is a huge piece of Tourmaline's business now, as far as what we're doing and how we're building out the future. I should do a little bit of a plug for the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. We're a big member there. We're part of all three pieces of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. So we're part of the granting organization that gives money to clean tech companies. We are also the main, well, we are the operator of the emissions testing center. So that's a new exciting piece of work where we can test emissions at one of our gas plants in order to test things like tanks and flares and leak detection, repair, drilling and completions, and tons of work on zero emission well sites. We're building out, working with clean tech companies to build tons of work on zero emission well sites. And then even in the last part of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund, which is actually a venture piece, so it takes a little bit of ownership out of some of the clean tech companies, but the good thing about it is they really need that in order to scale. They really need that money investment and get there to scale. So I'm excited about the future of natural gas in our path to net zero, and I think we'll be a big part of it all the way through.
Thank you very much, Scott, for those comments. I think those were fantastic, because you touched on so many pieces there. It goes back to the way the people that work in this industry, those that are focused on this, we all want the same outcomes. We want strong communities. We want a healthy planet. And so we need to start seeing that in each other and what's going on in the industries that we have. And I think what you just touched on with really powerful things. I look forward to unpacking them a little more in the Q&A. And I think it's a great segue into Andrew's portion of the update with what's happening with the wood fiber project and all of the innovations that have led to where it is right now. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me today, and also thanks to Scott for his comments. I think you'll find some common themes with what I'm about to say. Wood fibre LNG is situated on the historic village of Swiat in Squamish Nation territory, and I'd be remiss not to highlight the agreements between Wood Fibre and the Squamish Nation government to recognise the Squamish Nation as a regulator on our project. Not all innovation is technical, so I think we can, but there are other areas where we can apply similar principles. Wood fibre also operates in and around the South Sea in the Lower Mainland, where I'm speaking to you from today, and see the territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam nations. And finally, Wood fibre recognises the Treaty 8 territory lands on which this conference is taking place. So wood fiber LNG is a mid-scale LNG project about 8 kilometers from Squamish in southern BC, predominantly supplied by gas from our sister company, Pacific Cambrian Energy, operating up in your part of the world. And wood fiber LNG carries this unique all-electric, powered by hydro branding, which gives us the most efficient LNG facility design in the world. And that's really what we're going to unpack as to how we've gone through to reach that point. But before we get into that, I'd like to just pass a couple of comments on the process of innovation, because this is where I think a lot of the lessons are that we can apply across a range of sectors. So innovation, to me, kind of in the moment of innovating, typically it's more evolutionary than revolutionary. You know, it's a series of incremental steps over time. You know, we didn't jump from telegrams to iPhones in a single bound, and it's that continuous process. And after a period of time, you look back and you kind of go, "Wow, how far have we come?" And that's where we see these perceived big jumps in progress. So yeah, pushing the boundaries, continuously improving, looking for complementary technologies from other sectors to bridge the gaps. So we're not looking for strokes of genius here. They help, but we're not looking for those. And innovation, I think, is more often characterized by significantly more perspiration than inspiration. Half of the audience is now really glad this is a virtual conference. Moving on to how that's applied to wood fiber LNG. It is designed to be the cleanest, lowest emitting LNG facility on the planet. And the way we would measure that would be to look at carbon intensity. So how many tons of CO2 do we emit for every ton of LNG that we produce? Wood fiber LNG is more than 1/4 than the next best, which happens to be LNG Canada. So when wood fiber LNG is up and running, you'll have the 2 best in the world in the province, and runs at less than 1/10 of the global average. The headline we throw out is that's been achieved by electrification, leveraging hydropower, making wood fiber somewhat the Tesla of the LNG world. And the first thing you should think of is be suspicious of anyone who claims to be the Tesla of anything. But what we're going to run through is how that process of thought actually makes for a reasonably good analogy here. The other thing about innovation stories, we'll talk about the journey we've been on, but it's a story, so we also need to look at where it's going to go. We don't reach a point and then stop. We need to kind of continue into the future as well, which is similar to what Scott was just saying. So let's get into that electrification piece. And as Elon Musk knows better than anybody else in the world, it's not as simple as an engine swap and running out an extension cable. You know, you have to kind of go through your entire chain and how do you eliminate all the barriers to uptake and all those kind of things. And for us, it's not about electrification for the sake of electrification. It's about minimizing the amount of feed gas that we consume in the process. So a typical LNG facility of modern design will consume about 7 or 8% of its feed gas as fuel gas, driving turbines, producing power. Some of the older facilities will be closer to 10. How do we go about going from that 7 or 8% down to about 0.5% that wood fiber has? Well, the big electric motors do a lot of the heavy lifting. It's about 80% of the benefit we get from replacing the gas turbines in the heart of the process with electric motors. But we have to then go through and say that, well, where else are we consuming? What are all the other things where gas gets used on site, and how do we eliminate those? So there's adding compression to be able to recycle that gas back into the process. You know, streams that almost every other facility would burn as fuel gas. We've gone through all the different causes of flaring and saying, well, where is there a technical solution that eliminates that cause of flaring? So it then becomes just that kind of safety component, which it's designed to be. So the product of all of that process of innovation is that our conversion rate of feedstock to end product is very high. And we've managed to do that in a way that the implementation risk is low, because no individual component here is bleeding edge technology. It's all established stuff that's being used in other industries, other parts of the world, but being combined in this way for the first time. So let's take that concept and go forward and kind of go, well, where does this go in the future? Clearly, it's applicable to other LNG facilities, particularly in the province or an area where you have length of clean power. But let's also take this and think about hydrogen. We know that the cost of hydrogen is prohibitive, green hydrogen in particular. So if you were trying to design a hydrogen liquefaction facility, your motivation to really minimize the amount of your product that you're consuming in your process is even higher than it is for natural gas. hydrogen liquefaction processes are very, very similar to natural gas liquefaction processes. So if you want to have a great liquefied hydrogen industry in the future, having a great LNG industry is a really good place to start. And where wood fiber aims to be is to be the pinnacle of performance in that LNG industry. With that, I'll hand back to Bryan.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a great overview of the facility, of the innovation that's happening right now, and I hope those of you listening are getting the thread right now. You hear what's happening in the upstream with what Scott described with Tourmaline. You hear what's happening with our facility development, with Andrew just described to us. This allows us to provide that lowest emission LNG, and that is very important right now because the market is moving to lowest emission cargoes very quickly. So the time that we've spent on all of this work, it's actually a competitive advantage now. And so now that's why I said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, now is Canada's time for our LNG industry because of everything you've just heard here. And to Scott's point, we need to be able to demonstrate that to the market too. So I think that's why it's great to have Bill here to talk about what he does, what he sees, and the power of where Bill's vantage point with the digital supercluster is that's a group that's working across sectors to innovate. So it's just, the real center of everything that's happening is happening in that organization. So Bill, great to have you here today, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Bryan. It's always a pleasure to be on a panel with you. And thank you, Cheryl, and all the folks at the Chamber for this opportunity to be part of this important discussion. I think Scott and Andrew did a great job of kind of mapping out all of the pathways to innovation and what that actually looks like, and a lot of really great points that they both brought up in their talks. So I've had the privilege of being part of the digital supercluster since its origin days. And if we go back to 2016, I know Bryan and I and some of the folks on the Business Council of BC had conversations to say, what is our collective advantage in the sectors that we find of greatest strength in British Columbia, and how do we propel that into the next decade or several decades to kind of create the foundation for sort of future generation success? And that was really what was the foundation of the thought process around a supercluster. And as Bryan had mentioned, it really is an attempt to look at how you can do innovation at scale across sectors. And that was really the thesis there, is where are we situated well from a technology standpoint? How do we apply them to some of the core industry segments that are here in British Columbia? So we landed on the concept that digital technologies, and there's not a single organization on the planet that isn't thinking about what digital transformation is going to mean for them over the next several years. And I think part and parcel of that is for our energy sector, how does digital play into that? Has been long conversation to look at how you can gain efficiencies in your operations, as well as build sort of the innovation pathways for better and better products. So when we set up the supercluster, the idea here was to build on this theme of collaboration. And it is a new concept in many respects. Most R&D pursuits, research and development pursuits, are done by singular organizations, possibly outsourced to other firms. What we tried to do was create this new model in which multiple organizations are innovating on R&D products altogether. And that's where you can take learnings from different sectors into account. That's where there's cross-licensing opportunities for intellectual property. That's where we can build Canadian advantage. And so we've been at this now for about 3 years, and it's been remarkable to see the growth trajectory-wise and the participation of so many organizations. We now have more than 1,000 organizations that are part of the digital supercluster. We have invested in a portfolio that has more than 80 projects valued at over $310 million. And that has more than 50% of the investments are coming from private sector and industry in those investments. And on average, what we're seeing is that there's somewhere between 6 and 10 organizations that are all working together to build products that no single one of them could have built on their own. And I think that's a testament to both the diversity and the strength that we have as Canadian innovators. Now, more specifically around the natural resources area, and particularly what we've seen in the projects that we have invested in, as well as some of the proponents of projects that we're working with, is that there's this great theme around how we build the natural resources sector into a sustainable, meaningful, carbon neutral way. And so in many respects, it's like reimagining what we can do in this area. And so it's everything from, resilient forestry, low carbon mining, all of the attributes of LNG and sort of whether it's oil and gas and energy production that actually contemplates what the path to net zero would look like. In addition to that, we're doing a bunch of projects that are really trying to drive the digitization of industry, looking at how transformation can actually empower them to be more productive, more competitive, and also at the same time looking very closely at what the skills are required and investing in rapid skilling systems along with many of our companies to ensure that people have all the capabilities necessary to thrive in this new digital age. So more specifically in some of the projects that we've invested in, we see kind of three tracks. There are investments in digital technologies that are really trying to drive at the productivity piece. This is operational efficiencies. This is sort of taking a look at whether it's a digital twin of their operations or analytics that really help them to kind of unpack the core areas where they can seek improvements. That's where we've seen a number of projects really focused on. We've seen projects in supply chain optimization. In British Columbia, and I'd say in Canada broadly, we've got tremendous capabilities around next generation computing and technologies around artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of which contributes towards predictive analytics and sort of new models that companies can use to kind of optimize every aspect of how they go about their production lines. So we're seeing a number of projects in that area. And the third area that we're seeing is, of course, and not surprisingly, I think in this era, it's really about can you do the first two areas while keeping an eye on where the environmental sustainability comes from. So we're seeing a lot more projects that are focused on environmental measurement and impact, trying to correlate the effects of everything that they're doing in some sort of way. And that very much is a collective exercise because, we're seeing any sort of natural resources project usually has beside it other natural resources projects, and the constituency stakeholder groups around that all are collecting data. And the essence of all this is a pooling of capabilities and knowledge and data that helps to inform how projects should proceed. And I think this is maybe a testament to where the opportunity is for Canada. If we can really harness the dual concepts of collaboration with this notion that we really do have some tremendous capabilities around lower carbon footprint production methods. And if we can actually prove that using data as the core element of this and actually figure out how we standardize and brand around this, we can repurpose the Canada brand in a manner that talks about sustainability by default. And I think we definitely have some work to do there. I think we'll probably all generally agree that we're not standing in the best reputational piece right now as far as sustainability and the energy side. But I think now is the time to invest in the digital platforms that allow us to actually embellish on that, prove it, and the sustainability pieces of that will reap economic rewards for us in the long term. Thanks very much for that, Bryan. Back to you.
Wow, Bill, you said a lot there. You said it all, really, right? Like it's you talked a lot about brand, and I think that's so important for this dialogue, for the LNG sector, for natural gas sector, for natural resources more generally. And so I want to pick up on that thread because Scott, you talked about it too. About I think it's easier to have conversations about the end point, the point we want to get to, without really focusing on what do you need to do to get there, and what are we doing to get there. It's less of an announceable, right? And so I think when I look at all the three things that I've just heard from your talks, there's powerful work going on every single day to try and solve for this. Our narrative around energy development is not there, and so I look for your thoughts around how do we continue to unpack that and get to that brand Canada discussion where we actually provide the space for our policymakers to make decisions that benefit. I think when there's so much noise out there, it's difficult for policymakers to make decisions. So it's easy to choose one or the other. When Bill, what you've just outlined is that everybody can win here. we can have a Canadian economy firing on all cylinders across all of our sectors if we figure out how to get collaborative, how to figure out how to have that yes and conversation. So maybe back to the three of you, and I'll start with you, Scott, and go back around. Just how do we continue to unpack that conversation and get more people around a table solving and having just, ordinary Canadians starting to wrap their heads around this too?
Thanks, Bryan. I would kind of say it's about celebrating what we've done and where we've gotten to, and then as soon as we're done celebrating what we've done, get back to the hard work of making it even better. And to kind of put that into context, like I would say there was a national drive that was targeted towards methane, just in general. You saw kind of the provinces jump on board with that piece as well. And if you look at what Canadian industry has done, the clean tech companies that have come out of that and done very significant work should really be celebrated. Like we've got satellites in space that are monitoring methane right now that came from Canadian companies. I'm going to try to not name any names, but I'll just kind of say technology in general. We've got like fixed wing aircrafts that can do leak detection at like rates that we would have never guessed, and they've got the ability to pinpoint exactly where that's coming from, which allows operators to find out where the problems are and fix them. No operator wants to be leaking methane. They want to fix their problems. We've kind of done that same thing with drones and continuous monitors and a whole variety of technology around leak detection and repair. And it's quite incredible as to what's developed, considering that was just a very short time ago. We decided that was a problem that as an industry we wanted to fix. And then to go above and beyond that, we've kind of said, well, not only do we want to fix it, we don't want to be doing it anymore. So any of the well sites that had methane emissions, we've moved into zero emissions technology. So BC is kind of leading the path on timing, at least for that, where zero emission well sites are now regulation. And the technologies that got developed, like we've got NASA Stirling engines going out on locations in order to generate power. We've got all sorts of hybrids of solar and really cool tech that has come out there. So let's make sure people know about it and celebrate it, and then let's get working on the next piece. And there's no reason why natural gas can't be just as clean as some of the other clean techs that are out there.
Now, I would build on that a little bit and kind of say that there's two prongs to this. One is the recognition that particularly through LNG, Canada can continue to thrive as a gas producer, but exporting that gas to other places where it's displacing coal. So Canada's consumption is coming down, so Canada's emissions are coming down, and then the gas is being used to bring emissions down in other countries as well. So there's that global part of the picture. But coupled with that is the stuff that Scott was just talking about, which is Canada is better at producing oil and gas than most of the parts in the world. It's got some of the strongest ESG standards. It's the kind of thing that attracts a guy like me to come and work in this country, is to say, look, this is something that we can do really well. Methane emissions are a great example of where technology has continuously improved. So satellites are the new thing, but I had to go back about 15 years to see the start of optical gas imaging cameras. It's kind of it was one big step, and then we're on the next big step, with the satellite and the aircraft monitoring. So it's being able to tell those stories with Canadian data, and I'm emphasizing that with Canadian data, because particularly when we talk to people about production, the data that gets thrown back is almost always from West Texas. And if we're talking about any kind of production facility, you got to look at the rocks. Northern BC is not West Texas. It's very different geology, very different risks. So let's get the Canadian data out there to demonstrate and build that confidence in that the standards of ESG.
Thank you, Andrew. Bill?
Yeah, I think both of those comments are spot on. I think the two things I would add to it is that there is a growing body of conversation around the concept of natural capital, and some of the things that Andrew just touched upon about data, and ultimately is having a better sense of what you're measuring and why, the transparency benefits that go along with that, and then. If we learned anything through sort of the many years on the energy oil sands, is that it really is an integrative sort of map that we have to show, right? It's much more than an isolated sort of production side of the equation. And it brings me to sort of my second point on this, is that The ability to kind of convene the conversations with multiple stakeholders simultaneously, I think is really quite important. Just as an example, we're doing something next week with the Cascadia Innovation Corridor and University of Victoria to have a discussion about net zero with, I think it's going to end up being about 300 or 400 people. And it's really a workshop, just an ideation workshop to talk about where can this go? What are the things that need to happen? And because, it's all about kind of unlocking new thought processes that maybe we are not thinking about if we're in the particular practice that get brought in by other groups. And if we can kind of get on that path earlier, I think it creates the conditions for sort of more unity across sort of the Canadian landscape. The Build Canada brand one, we've always been really good at destroying each other on the way to success, right? These are self-inflicted wounds. So if we can find a way to kind of overcome that tendency by trying to generate the conditions for people to come together earlier rather than creating potholes for one another down the road, I think that would be the spirit of kind of building the brand that we all aspire to.
Those are great comments from the three of you, and I couldn't agree with them all more. I mean, it's really, in my mind, like, it's about rallying around decarbonization. We need to rally around it because we're part of the solution, right? And I think that's where you see the investment climate going there now. The divestment movement is long over. The markets know that investment is needed in order to empower all of the things that you've just talked about. We need to be able to fund it. There needs to be that virtuous investment cycle that happen there. I want to get to the questions from the Q&A, and that's great. I see a couple now that please continue to put them in there. And it's from Clarence, the one I want to get to first. And I think it's a little bit about that ESG comment that has been a thread throughout. And what is that, right? ESG is a term that everyone's using, and I think ESIG is a big one opportunity for us, the Indigenous inclusion and partnerships that we are engaging with in our industry, and that we have an opportunity to do more of. So Clarence really asking around, innovation in tech is very, very important, but from a communities and inclusion perspective, First Nations communities really are at the center of this growth, and we're seeing it. And maybe I'll start with you, Andrew, because I know there's been such a powerful path, particularly with the Squamish Nation on the project, both as with the environmental assessment certificate, and also with the design of the project too, as those conversations have progressed over the last decade, which again sets us apart, that we've taken this time to develop this industry. So I'll go to all of you, but maybe Andrew first on the importance of engaging and First Nations inclusion in our industry.
Sure. So look, absolutely, we would view the Squamish Nation as a partner on this project, and the environmental certificate that we've agreed with them that they've issued for our project. I mean, that is a genuine piece of innovation in its own right. Looking at how do we work better and create a future, and through the process of working with them, building skills and abilities and that kind of thing. But what your question made me think of, Bryan. Yesterday, I was being interviewed by a group of school kids from Staroma School, First Nation school in Squamish, and they're doing a project on the ecology of how sound. And one of their questions was, where do you want wood fiber to be in 10 years' time? And part of my response was, I want to build a team that's inclusive, diverse and inclusive for people in the community, the First Nations community, as well as the local community, so that the people are on the team, they're on the site. There's people on the team who care about the ecology of sound, who care about what we're doing, and then back in at the barbecue on a Friday night, saying, hey, we are doing the right thing here. And those stories getting out about, from people who are there and living it and working it, those stories getting out about how do we manage these things, how seriously we take it. There's an inherent assumption that, we're one step removed from Texas wildcatters, to use another Texas example, and that's just so far from the truth. So I think getting those stories out in the community will be tremendously powerful.
Scott or Bill?
Yeah, I would say as we're working on these opportunities, we have the ability to kind of include everyone and collaborate in the process. Like, for example, we're working on ways on our diesel displacement initiatives. We want to get more natural gas engines out and less diesel engines out and replace them. So we're working with local First Nation companies in order to do that. So when you're collaborating together, you can collaborate to do all these pieces at the same time. You can kind of hit the ES and G all in one project where you're working to make things better from an environmental point of view and really work with your communities in order to make that happen. So I would say if you can combine all the pieces of the ESG, you're doing it even better, right? So environmental is important, but working with our communities is important for every aspect of what we do.
Thanks, Scott. Bill, anything to
add? I think it's all pretty well been said. I almost feel like it's going to be, it's quickly moving from a responsible thing to do to you must do it. And so I know the Business Council is kind of putting forth some ideas about how BC maybe could be a leader in all aspects of ESG. I think the work that's already been done on our adoption to UNDRIP is evidence that we have the will to kind of do things in a different way. Making that sort of implementable across sort of the multiple facets of the economy and social structures is going to be our challenge. And the only way to tackle that is with this idea of getting folks together on these conversations. And as you said, Bryan, it's really trying to orchestrate the right collaborations to make that all happen.
Great. So I want to get to the Q&As. I know we only have a few minutes left. There's a question from Gary there, and I'll just sort of summarize it, but it talks around data that is contained within companies themselves that they take, whether it's soil, water, etc. Making that more broadly available may be helpful. And in a supercluster sort of way. And again, Gary, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to summarize it, but it's really about sharing, right, between the companies themselves and amongst that. And I think each of you would have a really good perspective on that. How do we increase the collaboration at every single level to ensure we get the best outcomes across the board? So Scott, maybe I'll start with you.
Like I think the data piece is incredibly important. It's what's allowing us to invest our money in the right places when it comes to getting the biggest bang for your buck. I see a future of life cycle analysis being a huge part of our industry and every industry. I think it's going to be a measuring stick coming through into the future. And then when it comes to just making data public, there's a fine line between transparency and just overwhelming data that can be significantly misinterpreted. Like this piece of data that we're going through in order to really understand emissions and everything else, it is huge, and there's thousands of instruments out there, and there's thousands of things out there all contributing, and being able to understand how to use that data, make meaningful value out of it is really important. So I would say transparency is absolutely important for the narrative and for trying to improve public trust and everything else. But to just go release all the data, I don't know that would be a big service to anybody, and would need to, and just for us to consume it is needing companies and resources like Bill to be able to say, well, how do we consume that much data? How do we get value out of it? How do we get business intelligence and artificial intelligence and turn that into something that's meaningful? And I think that's the important piece, is to get the meaningful process data out to the public.
Great, thanks, Scott.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that for a moment, Bryan, because I think it's a big question, and there's lots of challenges that are implicit in it. Scott just kind of outlined some. I think for every organization we've worked with, there's no shortage of data. It's actually, if anything, it's actually sorting through what data is meaningful. And there's an awful lot of data that, from an integrity perspective or data hygiene is probably not fit for purpose, fit for use. And some of the stuff is quite dated as well. So there's an organizational challenge there. When you get to multiple organizations on it, we've actually been involved in a few projects that we've invested in to try to build data commons and data collectives. There's a lot of public data that's out there, the government organizations, particularly around water measurement and management, remote sensing, Earth observation data. Oftentimes you can find those. The biggest trick is to find the right correlations amongst them. So the efforts I think that we need to do are areas like standardization of of data, areas around making it searchable, findable, and then ultimately, the idea of pooling data is to be able to enact some of the real technology around things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, so that you can use the information there, cross-correlate it with other sources of information. That's what builds value for a corporation. So for an organization to participate, there has to be sort of a set of other considerations, which is largely because they want better intelligence. And the intelligence may be gathered as a result of being able to see their data cross other use cases from other organizations simultaneously. We also see sort of the evolution of data marketplaces. So there'll always be a blend of public or sort of open data combined with proprietary data sets, and lots of different governors around how you do that. There's a whole body of research around data trust models, data exchanges, data marketplaces, e-commerce methods around that. But in the end, I think what we're all trying to strive to is to have a common language across this. And the analogy I would use is the reason why we can all use the internet so well is that 25, 30 years ago, they built a nomenclature for being able to search for anything that you want on a basic set of standards. Industrial data sets don't operate that way. Environmental data sets don't operate that way. And we need to get to that where we can have the industrial equivalent of the search engine and the web. And then that will make for sort of all these things that we're seeking to be able to do and to be able to translate all that much more meaningful.
And I would think of two parts to this. One is the data sharing between operators, which I think very much is what Bill's talking to here, and the ability to use that to improve health, safety, environmental outcomes, and that kind of collaborative part of it between operators is good for the industry. So finding a way to get to that is incredible. The second part, I would echo Scott's concern around misinterpretation of data. And I think there's a role to bridge that gap from some of the kind of the certification type bodies. So Pacific Cambrian, we've been working with, I think, Equitable Origins to get an expert to review it and say, we recognize that they are doing X, Y, Z. So I think certifications are the kind of thing which we can align on what makes sense as an industry. Certainly for the LNG industry, there's not a lot that's appropriate for the LNG industry in Canada at this stage. We need to develop that. And I think that's how we bridge that gap with the public.
Oh, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you to the three of you. I see Cheryl's on the screen, which means that our time is up. This has been, we could have gone on for much longer. Thank you for your expertise and for your time today. Again, thank you to Cheryl, to you and the chamber for this opportunity. Over to you, Cheryl.
I'm starting to feel like the Grim Reaper. Every time we get like a really great conversation happening, I stroll in and end it. Sorry, I apologize. And yes, we could go another hour for sure. I want to thank Andrew, Scott, and Bill for joining us for this session this morning. I know it's takes some time out of your busy schedule, and we appreciate the knowledge that you bring to this conversation. Quickly before we leave, because I don't think I'm going to see Bryan again online here like this, I really have to thank you, Bryan, and your team, Johanna and Kaylee, who have contributed so much to making this conference a success. You've moderated, you've spoke, you've been a panelist, you guys have networked with me and helped me along this path of planning this. So thank you for everything that you guys have done for this conference. Its success really lies on your shoulders as well. So I appreciate everything you've done.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, for that. It's been a great couple of days, and kudos to you and your team. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And so we're going to just quickly break for lunch, and then we're going to come back with the mayor's meeting, really get into that regional conversation. Again, I just want to remind you quickly of some of our fantastic sponsors: Tourmaline, Coastal GasLink, Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, City of Fort St. John, MMP, SurePoint, Enbridge, Suraris, Petronas, Digital Technology, Supercluster, Tenaris, and First Nations LNG, Moose FM, and of course, one of our favorites here now is, of course, Eagle Vision and Kent, who is our IT administrator. So thank you to everybody here before we quickly go to lunch. And I look forward to seeing you on our next session. Again, as I said, it'll be the mayor's meeting, which should be an interesting conversation too. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you.